Most people think getting rich is a straight line. Save money, invest it, wait. But that's not how it works at all. The truth is, the first time your money doubles, it almost breaks you. And then after that, it gets so easy it feels like cheating. Here's exactly why that happens, and the math behind it that most people never see. There's a reason the people who already have money seem to get richer without doing anything. It's not luck, it's not connections, it's not even skill. At least not entirely. It's a very specific mathematical force that kicks in once you cross a certain threshold. And until you cross it, every single dollar feels like you're pushing a rock uphill. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say you start from zero, you get a decent job, you cut your spending, you manage to save $500 a month. That's genuinely impressive. Most people don't even do that. You invest it into something like a broad index fund. It earns around 10% a year on average, which is roughly what the S&P 500 has returned historically over long periods. You stay consistent. You don't touch it. How long until you hit your first $100,000? About 12 to 13 years. How long until that same account hits 200,000? About 5 more years. How long until it hits 400,000 from there? Another 4 years or so. You see what's happening? The time it takes to double keeps shrinking. The money starts doing the heavy lifting instead of you. But that first stretch, that first 12 to 13 years, to get to 100,000, that's where most people give up. That's where it feels pointless. That's the hardest part, and almost nobody talks about why, so let's talk about it. The first reason the beginning's so brutal is something called the base effect, and it's painfully simple once you understand it. 10% of $1,000 is $100. 10% of $100,000 is $10,000. 10% of $1 million is $100,000. The return percentage stays the same, but the actual dollar amount you're earning explodes as the base gets bigger. When you're just starting out, even a great year in the market might only put a few $100s in your account from growth alone. That's so small compared to the months of work it took to save it that it barely registers. It feels meaningless, it feels like the investing isn't working, but it is working. You just don't have enough base yet for it to feel real. This is why so many people quit in the first few years. Not because they made a mistake, not because the strategy is wrong, but because the numbers look too small to matter. They save $6,000, the market goes up 10%. They made $600. Compared to the thousands they put in themselves, that 600 feels like a joke. Fast forward 10 years, that same account is sitting at $120,000. The market goes up 10%. They just made $12,000 without lifting a finger. That's more than most people save in an entire year, and they didn't have to do anything extra to earn it. Same percentage, completely different life. And also you can have a completely different life if you start your YouTube channel. Today, since YouTube is the golden opportunity of this decade, if done well, and if you want to start, I can help you directly in my free community with the link below. The second reason is about behaviour, not math. And this one is more uncomfortable to talk about. When you have very little saved, every financial decision feels like life or death. If you have $3,000 saved and your car breaks down and it costs $2,500 to fix, that is a catastrophic event. You're basically starting over. That kind of thing makes people scared. Scared to invest too aggressively. Scared to take any risk at all. Scared to leave the money sitting anywhere it could go down. And that fear is completely rational. Given the circumstances, you can't afford to lose what little you have. But that same fear keeps you in low return, low risk places right when you need growth the most. People with small savings keep too much in cash, or savings accounts earning next to nothing, because losing even a fraction of it feels unbearable. Now compare that to someone sitting on $800,000. The market drops 20%. On paper, they just lost $160,000. That sounds terrifying, but here's what they know that newer investors don't. That's temporary. They've seen the market recover before. They're not going to sell. They're probably going to buy more. And because they have so much of a cushion, that drop doesn't threaten their actual life. They can still pay their rent, their food, their bills. The investment dip is painful on paper, but it doesn't actually change anything about how they live right now. That emotional safety net allows wealthier people to make smarter, calmer investment decisions. Not because they're emotionally stronger people, just because their circumstances allow for it. When you're starting out, you don't have that cushion. That's the hidden tax of being poor that nobody really names directly. You pay more emotionally and financially to have less. The third reason is debt, And this one works like a reverse snowball against you when you're early. Most people in their 20s or 30s are dealing with some combination of student loans, car payments, and credit card balances. Every dollar going toward high-interest debt is a dollar that isn't compounding for you. It's compounding for whoever you owe money to. Credit card debt at 20% interest is essentially a guaranteed 20% loss on any money you could have invested instead. You can't beat that in the market. The best investors in the world would kill for guaranteed 20% returns. But you're giving it away. Millionaires on average carry very little bad debt. Most of them paid it off years ago. So their income isn't leaking out the bottom every month. Everything they earn goes either into their lifestyle or into assets that grow. They're not bleeding money to banks before they even get a chance to save. There's also a second layer here. Once you build real wealth, banks actually want to lend you money, and they'll do it at much lower rates. A person with $1 million in assets can borrow money at 5 or 6% to buy a rental property, generating 10 or 12% returns. They're using someone else's money to make more money, and the math works in their favour. Someone starting from scratch can barely get approved for a basic loan, let alone at favourable rates. The system is genuinely harder to navigate at the start. That's not a political statement, it's just how the numbers work. Now let's get into what actually happens once you cross that threshold, because this is the part that makes everything click. There's a concept in physics called escape velocity. It's the speed you need to reach to break free from gravity and leave the Earth's atmosphere. Below that speed, no matter how hard you push, gravity pulls you back. At that speed or above, you break free, and the hard part is over. Wealth has the exact same concept. Below a certain point, you're fighting against the drag of low returns, debt, limited borrowing power, and behavioural fear. Above it, something shifts. The math starts working for you automatically, even when you do nothing. Let's run the actual numbers so you can see this clearly. You have $1 million invested in a broad index fund. You do nothing. You add nothing. You just leave it. At 10% average annual return. Year 1, $1,100,000. Year 7, roughly $2 million. Year 11, roughly $3 million. Year 14, roughly $4 million. You turned $1 million into $4 million in 14 years by literally doing nothing. Now compare that to someone starting from scratch, investing $500 a month at the same 10% return. To reach just that first 1 million takes approximately 30 years. 30 years to get to $1 million starting from zero. 14 years to go from $1 million to $4 million doing nothing. The person with money made 3 times the gains in half the time with zero additional effort. That's not fairness, it's just math. And the sooner you understand it, the sooner you can position yourself on the right side of it. The rule of 72 makes this even more visual. If you divide 72 by your annual return rate, you get roughly how many years it takes for your money to double. At 10% annual returns, your money doubles roughly every 7.2 years. So here's what that looks like starting with $10,000. Year 0, $10,000. Year 7, $20,000. Year 14, $40,000. Year 22, $80,000. Year 29, $160,000. Year 36, $320,000. Year 43, $640,000. Year 50, $1,280,000. Look at how flat that line is for the first 2 decades. Then look at what happens at the end. The last doubling alone, from $640,000 to $1,280,000, was a gain of $640,000. The very first doubling was only $10,000. Same time period. Completely different result. This is the snowball. A small snowball rolling down a hill doesn't look impressive. You barely notice it. But roll it long enough and far. Enough and suddenly it's enormous and it's moving faster than you can control. The people who win at building wealth are not necessarily smarter. They're not working harder. They just started the snowball rolling and didn't stop it. There's one more thing worth talking about that often gets skipped over, and that's the psychological shift that happens once you hit real money for the first time. When you have nothing, money feels scarce. Every purchase is stressful. Every unexpected bill is a crisis. That scarcity mindset, even if it's completely justified by your actual situation, affects how you make decisions. You're more likely to take shortcuts. You're more likely to fall for get-rich-quick promises because slow and steady feels like it isn't working. You're more likely to spend money on things that feel good right now because delayed gratification is genuinely hard when you don't feel financially safe. Once you cross into real solid savings, something changes. Not because you became a different person, because the pressure lifts slightly. You start making clearer decisions. You stop looking at every dollar as survival money and start looking at it as fuel. You stop reacting and start thinking longer term. This isn't just a feeling. It actually shows up in research on financial decision making. People under financial stress make measurably worse financial decisions, not because they're less intelligent, but because stress literally narrows your thinking. It makes your brain focus on immediate problems and makes it harder to think about things 5 or 10 years from now. Getting past the early stage isn't just about the numbers. It's about removing the mental pressure that makes the numbers harder to manage in the first place. So what does all of this mean practically? If you're early in the process, the most important thing to understand is that the stage you're in right now is the hardest one. Not because you're doing anything wrong, not because it's taking too long, but because the math of compounding means the results are always backloaded. The reward comes later, and it comes much bigger than anything you're putting in right now. The goal isn't to get excited about your balance next month. The goal is to keep the snowball moving, even when it looks tiny, even when it feels pointless, even when a friend is bragging about some crypto trade they made last week, and your boring index fund went up $80 in a month. Keep it moving. The people who quit during this phase, and most people do quit, or at least slow down significantly, they stop the snowball before it builds real speed. Then they look up 10 years later and wonder why their account still looks small. It's because the snowball was stopped. It can't grow what you already removed from it. The people who stay consistent, who automate their investments so they don't even have to think about it, who resist the temptation to pull money out every time something goes wrong or every time something shiny shows up, those are the ones who eventually sit on the other side of the equation. Not lucky, not special, just in the game long enough for the math to work. The first doubling is the hardest because you're doing it with the least base, the most fear, the most debt drag, the least borrowing power, and the most psychological pressure. Every single factor is stacked against you in that phase, but you only have to survive it once. After that, each doubling comes faster. The money does more of the work. The pressure eases. The decisions get clearer. And eventually you hit a point where your money is growing faster every year than you could possibly save from working. And that's when everything changes. That's the snowball taking over. The question isn't whether it works. The math is settled. The question is whether you stay in long enough for it to work for you. If this helped you understand compounding in a way that actually makes sense, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Oh, anyway, I opened a new completely free community where I explain how to create and scale your YouTube channel. After an experience with over 10 successful channels, there I will give you all my strategies and tips to monetize and scale your faceless YouTube channel, and I will help you step by step. Since YouTube is the golden opportunity of 2026 if done well, I'm waiting for you. Just a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is for educational purposes only, and any results depend on your own decisions and actions.